Organizations are pushing autonomous AI agents into production at an incredible pace, but they're trying to secure them using legacy identity and access models. A traditional identity mechanism, like a JSON web token or an API key, serves a very specific, limited purpose. It simply tells the system who or what connected at a specific moment in time. Agentic systems operate differently. They do not just sit passively waiting to process inputs. They actively select and execute actions, looping through decision cycles continuously at runtime. When you rely on a one-time authentication token to govern an LLM agent, you are trying to cover a rapidly expanding, branching tree of autonomous actions with a single static snapshot of permission. A JWT or a service account can identify the caller, but neither of them can fully express runtime authority, the specific purpose of the execution, or the boundary conditions the agent must respect as it works. In an agentic system, knowing the identity of the actor is insufficient. The system must evaluate the legitimacy of the execution continuously, which requires a completely different governance model. Static identity models lead to authority drift. Without a mechanism to bind a specific task to a specific permission set, the agent inherits the broad, flat permissions of its service account for every action it takes. This leads directly to scope leakage. Because boundary conditions aren't durably carried into the execution environment, agents end up operating far outside their intended parameters. Without hard, governed controls, those boundaries dissolve. The system is left relying on fragile prompt discipline and implementation habits, resulting in dangerous improvisation exactly where autonomy is most risky. To solve this, enterprise governance must shift from a descriptive offline process into executable infrastructure. This requires the introduction of the Agentic Passport. It is a first-class, machine-readable object designed specifically to actively govern execution. The passport takes the actor, the delegated authority, the operational scope, the applicable policies, and the required proof obligations, and binds them into a single signed execution object that travels constantly with the agent. There is a common misconception in AI engineering that pairing strong authentication with rigorous prompt discipline results in a secure agent. It does not. The Agentic Passport is not a login token. Tokens confirm identity for a session. A passport actively dictates whether a specific execution is legitimate. It is also not a trace ID. A trace ID helps you follow an execution retroactively to see what happened. A passport sits at the front, determining whether the execution is allowed in the first place. It must be separated from context memory. Memory dictates what information is available. The passport dictates what the system is allowed to do with it. Finally, the passport is not a policy engine. It does not evaluate rules or execute constraints itself. Instead, the passport is the governable subject. It carries the identity, the scope, and the bindings that the policy engine relies upon to make decisions. It is not decorative metadata. It is an enforceable, runtime control artifact that brings design time intent into live production. Passports operate on a strict principle. They are issued, never invented. Agents cannot fabricate them. They are generated by a trusted service after validating conditions. To function effectively, the passport is a structured object. It carries identity, issuer, and delegated authority. It defines scope, allowed domains, and strict exclusions. It appends policy dimensions for data and effects. Finally, it enforces a short-lived validity window. If you strip away these critical fields, the object becomes too thin. It collapses into ordinary metadata and loses its ability to enforce boundaries. This schema guarantees that agency is formed in advance through rigorous design, rather than being improvised by the model during a runtime loop. The value of this object relies entirely on how it propagates across an AI guardrail architecture. When preparing to act, the system initiates context assembly. Context is gathered only if the passport's least privilege constraints actively permit its admission. Before processing a prompt, the model gateway inspects the passport to verify permitted models and allowed data. The ultimate inspection point is the effects gateway, checking the passport one final time before allowing any external side effect or state transition. The complexity of this validation increases in multi-agent systems, where handoffs and task delegations create new opportunities for legitimacy to break down. When Agent A passes a task to Agent B, the system uses the passport to determine if originating permissions are passed along, narrowed, or replaced. If two agents attempt to act on the same object simultaneously, passports interact with arbitration rules to resolve the conflict based on verified delegated authority. The core architectural rule is absolute. The passport must travel with the execution across governed components. It must never be silently dropped or loosely copied. The passport operates as the continuous runtime legitimacy service. Every governed step and enforcement engine relies entirely on it to maintain safety across critical boundaries. The lifecycle and value of the passport do not end when the specific execution is completed. Once the validity window closes, the expired passport becomes an immutable proof anchor, permanently locked into the system's audit chain alongside the side effects it authorized. Standard system logging only records the sequence of events. Passport-backed auditing proves the legitimacy of those events. This shifts an enterprise's risk posture. You move away from a state of claimed compliance, hoping policies were followed, to a state of mathematically provable compliance. This creates immense value during security reviews by enabling high-fidelity replay. High-fidelity replay systems use the passport to reconstruct the precise legitimacy conditions and authority boundaries present during the original execution. Long after the execution ends, the passport remains a stable, permanent identity anchor for side effects, approvals, and replay evidence. The deepest vulnerability in modern agentic systems stems from a single gap: the disconnect between static identity and continuous autonomous execution. The Agentic Passport closes this gap by establishing a continuous chain of governance. It takes standard identity and definitively connects it to runtime authority. It connects that authority directly to applicable policy and binds that policy directly to an operational scope. It connects the allowed scope to safe execution and anchors that execution in a verifiable proof of legitimacy. The Agentic Passport is the runtime identity and legitimacy envelope that makes autonomous multi-agent action governable. In agentic systems, knowing who connected is no longer enough. Execution itself must be governed. The passport is how you turn a theoretical boundary contract into an enforceable runtime reality.